For 60 years, humanity had walked among the stars with an open hand. They had discovered faster-than-light travel in the year 2041, and within a century, they had built 40 colony worlds across the galaxy. They called their government the Terran Concord, and it was everything humanity had always dreamed of becoming: peaceful, democratic, and fair. When they met the alien races of the galactic sovereignty for the first time, they did not come with weapons. They came with translators, trade agreements, and smiles. The sovereignty was old. It was a loose alliance of over 200 alien species, some of them millions of years older than humanity. They had seen young races rise before, full of fire and ambition. Most of them burned out or were crushed. Humanity, they decided, would be no different. The humans were clever, yes. They were creative and surprisingly adaptable. But they were small. Their fleet was tiny. Their military doctrine was entirely defensive. They had no appetite for war. And so the galaxy treated humanity the way powerful nations always treat the weak, with polite indifference and quiet disrespect. No one disrespected humanity more openly than the Valkyrie Dominion. The Valkyrie were a reptilian species, tall, armored, and bred for conquest. Their empire stretched across 80 star systems, all of them taken by force. They respected only one thing: strength. And humanity, in their eyes, had none. It started small, the way these things always do. Valkyrie warships began appearing near human colony borders. They would scan human vessels, follow them for hours, and then disappear. When Earth's diplomats filed complaints with the Sovereignty Council, the Valkyrie ambassador, a scarred old warlord named Sethrak, simply laughed. "Your species builds farms on contested worlds, and then cries when wolves appear at the fence," he said, in front of the entire council. "Perhaps you should learn to bare your teeth instead of your bellies." The council did nothing. A few delegates expressed mild concern. Most of them looked away. Humanity was not important enough to fight for. On Earth, the debate raged. The military leaders of the Terran Concord watched the border tensions with growing alarm. Admiral Kira Tanaka, the sharpest strategic mind in human space, stood before the High Chancellor's Council and laid out the facts in plain language. "They are testing us," she said. "Every patrol they send, every border they cross, is a test. And every time we respond with words instead of action, we tell them exactly what they want to hear: that we will not fight back." General Marcus Osei, the commander of all ground forces, agreed. He was a large man with a calm voice and steady eyes, the kind of person who never raised his voice because he never needed to. "The Valkyrie do not understand diplomacy," he said. "They understand force. If we do not show them force, they will keep pushing until there is nothing left to push." But the High Chancellor, Ilara Vasquez, would not be moved. Vasquez was a small woman with gray hair and a face lined by decades of service. She had led humanity through its greatest era of expansion and peace. She had signed treaties with 12 alien species. She had built the Concord into something that every human alive was proud of. And she believed with every fiber of her being that violence was a failure of imagination. "We will not become what we oppose," she told her admirals and generals. "The moment we pick up the sword, we lose everything that makes us worth defending. I will not be the chancellor who turned humanity into another Valkyrie." The military leaders accepted her decision. They had sworn oaths to the civilian government, and they honored those oaths. But privately, Admiral Tanaka returned to her office and pulled up a file she had never wanted to open. It was marked with a single word: Prometheus. She stared at it for a long time, then closed it and walked away. The border tensions continued. Valkyrie warships grew bolder. They began entering human systems openly, buzzing colony worlds, disrupting trade routes. Earth sent strongly worded protests. The Sovereignty Council filed the protests and did nothing. Sethrak made a public speech calling humans the galaxy's favorite pets, harmless and housebroken. Then the intelligence reports came in. A massive Velkari war fleet, over 300 capital ships, had been assembling in the Korath system, just 2 jumps from human space. Their target, according to every analysis, was a small colony world on the edge of Terran territory. Elysium 4. It was a farming world, green fields that stretched to every horizon. Small coastal cities where people lived quiet, simple lives. 11 million souls, most of them families who had come to the frontier looking for peace and open sky. Elysium had no military garrison. It had no orbital defense platforms. It had a small local police force and a weather satellite network. That was all. Chancellor Vasquez was informed. She read the intelligence brief 3 times. Then she sat down and personally composed a diplomatic message to the Velkari Dominion. It was calm, measured, and sincere. It acknowledged Velkari concerns about border territories. It proposed a joint commission to resolve disputes. It offered trade concessions. It appealed to reason and mutual interest. She sent the message on every channel, in every language, with every diplomatic protocol the galaxy had ever recognized. The Velkari did not respond. Hours passed, then a day, then 2 days. The war fleet in the Korath system began to move. Admiral Tanaka requested an emergency meeting with the Chancellor. She brought star charts showing the fleet's trajectory. There was no doubt they were heading for Elysium. "Let me move the 7th Peacekeeping Squadron to intercept," Tanaka said. "If we position them in the approach corridor, the Velkari may think twice." Vasquez shook her head. "The 7th Squadron is 12 frigates and 2 light cruisers. If the Velkari see them as a threat, it could trigger the very battle we are trying to prevent." "And if we do nothing?" The Chancellor looked at her admiral with tired eyes. "We keep talking. That is what we do. That is who we are." Tanaka left the room without another word. She went to her private quarters, opened a secure channel, and sent a single coded message to a facility buried deep inside Jupiter's moon Callisto. The message was only 3 words long. "Begin Stage 1. Then she waited, and hoped that the Chancellor was right and she was wrong. On Elysium 4, 11 million people went to sleep under a sky full of stars, not knowing that 300 warships were burning toward them through the dark. In the colony's small capital city, a man named Daniel Achebe, the planetary governor, kissed his daughter goodnight and sat down at his desk to review crop reports. It was the last ordinary night Elysium would ever know. The Velkari fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at exactly 0317 local time, when most of Elysium 4 was asleep. 300 warships filled the sky above the little farming world like a dark curtain being drawn across the stars. They arranged themselves in a perfect bombardment formation, a hemisphere of destruction aimed straight down at the planet's surface. Their weapons charged, and the energy readings were so intense that every sensor on the colony lit up red at the same time. Governor Daniel Achebe was pulled from his bed by his security chief. He was still putting on his shoes when he reached the communication center. The main screen showed the orbital view, hundreds of red dots surrounding his world like a swarm of hornets around a nest. "They're broadcasting," his communications officer said, her voice shaking. Achebe nodded. "Play it." The voice that filled the room was cold, deep, and unhurried. It spoke in translated galactic common, and every word was chosen to humiliate. "Human colony on the 4th planet. This is Warlord Sethrak of the Velkari Dominion. You are occupying territory that belongs to us. You have 2 hours to evacuate your population. After 2 hours, this world will be cleansed. This is your only warning." 2 hours. Achebe stared at the screen, and felt the world tilt beneath him. Elysium had 3 civilian spaceports. Under perfect conditions, with every ship flying at maximum capacity, they could evacuate maybe 200,000 people in 2 hours. There were 11 million on the surface. He did the math. The math was a death sentence. Achebe did not freeze. He did not waste time on anger or disbelief. He opened every channel he had and began giving orders. All ships were to begin loading immediately. Priority was given to children, the elderly, and the sick. Every shuttle, every cargo hauler, every private vessel that could reach orbit was ordered to fly. Then he sent a distress call to Earth. The message traveled at the speed of light across the communication relay network, bouncing from station to station. It reached the Terran Concorde's military command in 11 minutes. Admiral Tanaka received it and immediately ordered the nearest peacekeeping squadron to move at maximum speed to Elysium. But the nearest squadron was 14 hours away. 14 hours. The Valkyrie had given 2. Across Elysium, the evacuation was chaos and heartbreak. Parents carried children through streets lit by the red glow of charging weapons in orbit. Families were separated at spaceport gates. Old men and women pushed younger people ahead of them in line and told them to go, to run, to not look back. Ships launched half-loaded because there was no time to wait. 2 hours passed. The sky turned white. The first bombardment struck the northern continent. Entire cities disappeared in columns of fire that reached the upper atmosphere. The ground shook so hard that buildings collapsed hundreds of kilometers from the impact zones. Forests that had been growing since before humans arrived on the planet burned to ash in seconds. The coastal cities were hit next, and the oceans themselves seemed to boil where the energy beams touched the water. Governor Achebe was still in the communications center when the capital city was targeted. He had refused to evacuate. His staff had begged him. His security chief had physically tried to drag him to a shuttle, but Achebe had looked at the screens, showing millions of his people with nowhere to go, and he had made his choice. "I will not leave while they cannot," he said. His last act was to press the broadcast button on his console and speak directly to Earth. "This is Governor Daniel Achebe of Elysium 4. They are killing us. They are killing all of us. Please, tell the galaxy what happened here. Do not let them forget." The communication center took a direct hit 4 seconds later, but Achebe's message was not the last to leave Elysium. The TCS Resolve, a single Terran frigate on a nearby patrol route, had pushed its engines beyond their safety limits and arrived at Elysium 3 hours into the bombardment. Its captain was Commander Jianwei Park, a 34-year-old officer on his first solo command. His ship carried a crew of 112. It was armed with light defensive weapons, designed to fight pirates, not warships. Park saw the bombardment on his sensors before he even dropped out of faster-than-light travel. His tactical officer told him what he was looking at. 300 Valkyrie capital ships actively destroying a planet. The officer then told him, very quietly, that engaging would be suicide. Park did not hesitate. He aimed the Resolve directly at the largest gap in the Valkyrie formation, the space above a mountain range in the southern hemisphere, where long-range scans showed a massive underground bunker. 200,000 people were sheltering inside that mountain, and the Valkyrie were moving to finish them off. The Resolve dropped into normal space between the Valkyrie fleet and the mountain. Park opened a channel to the enemy fleet. "This is Commander Park of the Terran Concorde ship Resolve. You are committing an act of genocide against a civilian population. I am ordering you to cease fire immediately." The Valkyrie did not even respond to him directly. A group of 5 destroyers simply turned their guns toward the Resolve and opened fire. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted 90 seconds. The Resolve's shields failed almost instantly. Park ordered his crew to the escape pods, but he stayed at the helm, keeping the ship positioned as a shield between the enemy and the mountain below. The Valkyrie blew the ship apart, piece by piece. Park's final transmission was picked up by a relay satellite and broadcast live across every human world in real time. "Tell Earth, tell them what happened here. Tell them we did not run." The Resolve broke apart. Commander Park and 43 crew members who had stayed at their posts died in the void above Elysium. The bombardment continued for 6 more hours, 9 hours in total. When it finally stopped, it was not because the Valkyrie showed mercy. It was because there was nothing left to destroy. The surface of Elysium 4 was black and burning. The atmosphere was choked with ash. The rivers had evaporated. The cities were craters. Of 11 million people, fewer than 120,000 survived. Those who had reached the deep underground shelters or escaped on the first wave of evacuation ships. Everyone else was gone. The Galactic Sovereignty received the news within hours. The Sovereignty Council held an emergency session. Delegates from dozens of species expressed deep concern and sympathy for the loss of life. The Valkyrie ambassador, Warlord Sethrak himself, appeared via hologram and declared that the bombardment was a proportionate response to illegal human settlement on sovereign Valkyrie territory. No sanctions were proposed, no resolutions were passed, no military response was authorized. The session ended, and the delegates went to dinner. On Earth, there was no dinner. There was no sleep. There was no sound, except for the footage from Elysium, playing on every screen, in every home, on every human world. Billions of people watched their colony die. They watched the cities burn. They watched Commander Park's frigate fly into certain death to save 200,000 strangers. They watched Governor Achebe's last message. They watched, and something inside the human species, something that had been gentle and patient and hopeful for 60 years, finally broke. Chancellor Alara Vasquez stood in her office and watched the footage alone. She watched all 9 hours of it. She did not look away. When it was over, she sat in silence for 20 minutes. Then she stood, straightened her jacket, and walked to the chamber of the United Earth Assembly, where every representative of every human world was waiting for her. The chamber was silent when she entered. Every face was turned toward her. Many of them were still wet with tears. She walked to the podium, looked out at the representatives of the human race, and spoke. Her voice did not shake. It was quiet and clear and final, like the sound of a door closing forever. Citizens of the Terran Concord, we reached out to the galaxy with an open hand. That hand has been burned to the bone. We begged for peace. We were answered with fire. We showed mercy to those who had none. She paused. The silence was absolute. No more. From this moment forward, the Terran Concord is at war. And I say to the Valkyrie Dominion, and to every species that watched our people burn and did nothing, we are no longer merciful. The assembly did not cheer. They did not shout. They simply stood, every single one of them, in cold and total silence. It was the most terrifying sound the galaxy had ever not heard. The message went out to every human world at the same time, on every frequency, in every language. It was short, and it was clear, and it carried the weight of everything that had happened on Elysium. Directive Omega is now active. The open hand is closed. The fist awakens. On 40 colony worlds, and on Earth itself, people who had been weeping the night before stopped their tears and went to work. Not because they were told to, not because they were forced to, but because every single one of them had watched 11 million people die, and every single one of them had decided, quietly and personally, that it would never happen again. What the galaxy did not know, what no one outside of humanity's most classified circles had ever known, was that the Terran Concord had never been unarmed. It had simply chosen not to use its weapons. It was called Project Prometheus, and it was the greatest deception in the history of intelligent life. When humanity first ventured into the stars and met the sovereignty, they had looked at the galaxy and seen exactly what it was: a dangerous place full of powerful species that respected nothing but force. The idealists in the government wanted peace. The realists in the military wanted survival. And in a rare moment of perfect cooperation, they had found a way to have both. The plan was simple. On the surface, humanity would be exactly what it appeared to be: peaceful, diplomatic, and militarily modest. Behind the surface, in places no one would ever think to look, humanity would build the most advanced military force the galaxy had ever seen. Not to conquer, not to threaten, but to have ready, sealed and waiting, in case the day came when peace was no longer possible. They had been building for 60 years. Admiral Kira Tanaka had known about Project Prometheus since the day she received her admiral's stars. She was one of perhaps 200 people in all of human space who knew the full truth. Now, standing in the command center of the Terran War Authority, a facility buried 3 kilometers beneath the surface of the moon, she gave the order she had trained her entire life to give. Unseal the Aegis yards, all of them. Bring everything online. Deep inside Callisto, the largest moon of Jupiter, machines that had been sleeping for decades woke up. Enormous doors, each one 5 kilometers wide, began to open in the moon's surface. Lights spilled out from inside. The glow of fusion reactors and engine cores and weapons systems that had been maintained in perfect condition by automated systems for over half a century. The first ships emerged from Callisto, like giants rising from the ocean. They were enormous. Dreadnoughts and carriers and battleships of classes that no alien species had ever seen or imagined. Their hulls were black and smooth, designed not for beauty, but for one purpose only. Behind the first wave came more, and more after that. They kept coming for 6 hours. 3,200 capital warships, each one carrying weapons that would make the Valkyrie fleet look like children throwing rocks. But the ships were only part of it. Across human space, other sealed facilities were opening. Inside asteroid belts, hidden weapons platforms activated their targeting systems for the first time. On colony worlds, underground factories that had been disguised as mining operations began producing war material at a speed that would have been impossible for any other species. The plans had been laid decades ago. Every part, every supply chain, every manufacturing sequence had been designed and tested and refined in secret. All it needed was the word. The word had been given. General Marcus Osei took command of the ground mobilization. He stood before a wall of screens showing recruitment numbers from every human world, and even he, a man who had spent 30 years preparing for this moment, was stunned by what he saw. Volunteers were flooding in faster than the system could process them. Not young men looking for glory. Families, teachers, engineers, doctors, farmers from Elysium's sister colonies who had watched their neighbors die. Old soldiers who had retired decades ago and were now showing up at bases with their old uniforms, asking where to sign. The recruitment centers had expected to process 50,000 in the first week. They processed 2 million in the first 48 hours. Osei called Admiral Tanaka. "I have never seen anything like this," he said quietly. "Every single person I talk to says the same thing. They are not angry. They are not excited. They are simply decided." Tanaka understood. She had seen it in her own people, in the crews of the newly activated warships, in the engineers and technicians who were working around the clock without being asked. It was not the hot rage of a species looking for revenge. It was something colder and deeper and far more dangerous. It was the calm, absolute focus of a civilization that had made a collective decision and would not be turned from it. While humanity mobilized, the galaxy watched with confusion and growing unease. The sovereignty's intelligence networks detected the energy signatures coming from human space, the massive power readings from Callisto, the sudden spike in industrial output across 40 worlds, the movement of thousands of ships that had not existed in any database the day before. Analysts from a dozen species looked at the data and told their governments that the readings must be wrong. Sensor errors, equipment malfunctions. There was no way a minor race like humanity could produce these numbers. The Vicari were the least concerned of all. Warlord Sethrak received the intelligence reports at his command headquarters on Valkar Prime and tossed them aside with a snort of amusement. The humans are good at building things that look impressive. Let them play with their toys. When they send their little fleet to our border, we will crush it the way we crushed that frigate at Elysium. His officers laughed. They had won easy victories for so long that they had forgotten what it felt like to face a real enemy. Not everyone in the sovereignty was so confident. Ambassador Thyra of the Valesi Federation, one of the oldest and wisest species in the galaxy, requested a private meeting with Earth's ambassador, Dr. Lena Mwangi. The meeting took place on a neutral station, and Thyra asked one simple question. How long have you been hiding this? Mwangi looked at the alien diplomat for a long moment. Thyra was ancient, her translucent skin showing the bioluminescent patterns that indicated deep thought in her species. She was one of the few aliens who had ever treated humanity with genuine respect. Since the beginning, Mwangi said. Thyra was silent. Then she asked another question, more carefully this time. And you never used it. In 60 years, through every insult and every provocation, you had this power, and you never used it. Why? Because we hoped we would never have to. Thyra's bioluminescent patterns shifted to a color Mwangi had never seen before. Later she would learn that it meant something close to reverence, or perhaps fear. Your species is either the noblest race this galaxy has ever produced, Thyra said quietly, or the most terrifying. I am no longer certain which. On Earth, Chancellor Vasquez made one final appearance before the Galactic Sovereignty Council. She did not go to ask for help. She went to deliver a message, and every species in the galaxy was watching. She stood at the same podium where, for 60 years, human ambassadors had pleaded for peace and been ignored. She looked out at the assembled delegates, hundreds of alien faces, many of whom had sat in those same seats, and said nothing while Elysium burned. I stand here one last time, she said. Not to beg. Those days are over. I stand here to make something very clear. The chamber was silent. To the Valkari Dominion, we are coming. Not tomorrow, not next year, now. She turned her gaze across the full assembly. To everyone else, to those who watched our children burn and called it a border dispute, to those who filed our screams under matters of concern, to those who went to dinner while our world died, we want you to know something. We have very long memories, and we remember who was silent. She left the podium and walked out of the chamber. She did not look back. 3 days later, the Terran warfleet departed the Sol system. 3,200 warships moved in perfect formation, their engines burning so bright that astronomers on nearby alien worlds could see the light with their naked eyes. Long-range sensors across the galaxy detected the fleet and went quiet with disbelief. The readings were not wrong. The sensors were not broken. Humanity was coming. And for the first time in galactic history, every species in the sovereignty felt the same emotion at the same moment: fear. The first battle lasted 11 minutes. The Valkari had positioned their border fleet in the Korath Nebula. 800 warships, arranged in a classic defensive formation that had crushed a dozen species before humanity ever reached the stars. The fleet commander, a seasoned Valkari admiral named Drovak, was confident. He outnumbered the incoming Terran vanguard 3-1. His ships were battle-tested. His crews were veterans. He watched the Terran ships appear on his sensors and gave the order to fire. Nothing happened the way he expected. The Terran vanguard did not fly in a straight line toward his fleet the way every other species always had. They did not form battle lines or exchange volleys at range. Instead, the human ships did something his tactical officers had never seen before. They split into hundreds of small groups that moved independently, but in perfect coordination, like a single mind controlling 1,000 hands. They were inside his formation before his gunners could adjust their targeting. The war minds were fighting. These were humanity's secret weapon, not a single device, but a network of semi-sentient artificial intelligences that linked every ship in the fleet into one unified system. Each war mind could process more tactical data in 1 second than a Valkyrie command staff could handle in a day. They shared information instantly. They adapted to enemy movements before those movements were completed. They found weaknesses in formations that no living commander could see and exploited them with mathematical precision. Admiral Drovak watched his fleet come apart like a puzzle being disassembled by invisible hands. Ships that had been in strong defensive positions suddenly found themselves flanked from 3 directions at once. Weapons that should have hit their targets missed because the Terran ships moved at the last possible moment, guided by calculations that predicted enemy firing solutions before the triggers were pulled. 11 minutes after the first shot was fired, the Valkyrie border fleet ceased to exist. 800 warships destroyed, disabled, or captured. The Terran vanguards had lost 0 capital ships. A few frigates had taken damage. That was all. Admiral Drovak was pulled alive from the wreckage of his command ship. When he was brought aboard the Terran flagship, he looked at Admiral Kira Tanaka and said one word: "How?" Tanaka did not answer him. She was already looking at the star charts, planning the next move. The news of the Battle of Korath spread across the galaxy like a shockwave. Intelligence agencies from every major species scrambled to understand what had happened. They analyzed the sensor data, ran simulations, and consulted their best military theorists. The conclusion was always the same, and it was always terrifying. The humans had not fought harder than the Valkyrie. They had fought smarter, faster, and with a level of coordination that should not have been physically possible. For the first time, the galaxy began to understand what humanity had been hiding. The Terran warfleet pushed into Valkyrie space with a speed that stunned military observers. System after system fell, not in brutal sieges, but in quick, precise operations that targeted military installations and left everything else untouched. Shipyards were destroyed, weapons depots were captured, command stations were disabled with surgical strikes that killed the stations but spared the crews inside. Admiral Tanaka was methodical. She did not rush. She did not take unnecessary risks. And she did not, under any circumstances, target civilian populations. This was deliberate. This was the point. Every species watching, and they were all watching, could see the difference. The Valkyrie had burned an entire world of civilians to ash. Humanity was dismantling the Valkyrie military machine piece by piece, and leaving their cities, their homes, their families completely untouched. The contrast was impossible to miss and impossible to argue against. On the Sovereignty Council, delegates who had ignored the massacre of Elysium now found themselves unable to stop watching the war. Some of them felt something unfamiliar: shame. The humans were fighting a war forced upon them by genocide, and they were fighting it with more restraint than most species showed during peacetime border disputes. Dr. Lena Mwangi, Earth's ambassador, continued to attend council sessions. She sat in her usual seat, calm and composed, while the chamber buzzed with panic around her. Several species began quietly mobilizing their own fleets, not to help the Valkyrie, but out of fear that humanity might turn its attention to them next. Wang Yi addressed their fears directly during one session. She stood at the podium where Chancellor Vasquez had delivered her final warning, and she spoke in a voice that was almost gentle. "I can see the fear in this chamber. Let me ease some of it. We did not come for you. We came for those who burned our world. Our quarrel is with the Valkyrie Dominion, and with them alone." She paused and let her eyes move slowly across the assembled delegates. "But I will say this. We know who voted against sanctions after Elysium. We know who blocked the resolution to condemn the bombardment. We know who called it a proportionate response. We are not coming for you today, but we have very, very long memories. You may wish to consider that in your future decisions." The silence in the chamber lasted a full minute after she sat down. Meanwhile, Warlord Sethrak was no longer laughing. He had watched his border fleet disappear in 11 minutes. He had watched his shipyards go dark one by one, as the Terran fleet moved through his territory like a knife through water. His generals told him that conventional tactics were useless against the human war mines. His admirals told him that the Terran ships were faster, tougher, and carried weapons that his best scientists could not even identify. Sethrak was a brutal creature, but he was not stupid. He knew he was losing, and so he made the only decision a Valkyrie warlord in his position could make. He gathered every ship his empire had left and prepared for a final stand. 10,000 warships assembled in orbit around Valkyrie Prime, the Valkyrie homeworld. It was the largest fleet ever assembled by a single species in recorded galactic history. Sethrak broadcast a message to the entire galaxy, standing on the bridge of his personal dreadnought with his officers behind him. "Humans," he said, his voice full of forced confidence, "you have won battles against our outer fleets, but you have not faced the full strength of the Valkyrie Dominion. Come to our homeworld. Come and see what happens when you face a real enemy. I am waiting." Admiral Tanaka received the broadcast aboard her flagship, the TCS Remembrance, named for Elysium. She watched it once, then turned to her tactical staff. "He wants us to come, so we will go." The Terran Warfleet arrived at Valkyrie Prime with 2,800 ships, less than a third of the Valkyrie force. Every military analyst in the galaxy expected a long, bloody battle. The Valkyrie had the numbers, the defensive position, and the home advantage. The battle lasted 4 hours. It was not even close. The war minds executed a strategy so complex and so perfectly timed that post-war analysts from 14 different species would spend decades trying to understand it. The Terran fleet moved like a living thing, constantly shifting, constantly adapting, finding and exploiting weaknesses in the Valkyrie formation faster than the Valkyrie could react. Human ships appeared where they should not have been, struck targets that should have been impossible to reach, and vanished before the return fire arrived. One by one, the Valkyrie ships went dark, destroyed, disabled, surrendered. The 10,000-ship armada was picked apart with the calm efficiency of a surgeon removing a tumor. Sethrak's flagship was the last to fall. Tanaka had given specific orders: disable. She wanted the warlord alive. When the boarding teams cut through the airlock of Sethrak's dreadnought, they found the warlord on his bridge, standing alone. His officers had fled or surrendered. He was staring at the tactical display showing the wreckage of his fleet. 10,000 ships, the pride of the Valkyrie Dominion, reduced to debris and silence in 4 hours. He did not resist when they took him. He was brought to Admiral Tanaka aboard the Remembrance. He stood before her in chains, and he expected what any Valkyrie commander would expect after defeat: execution, a quick death, the warrior's end. Instead, Tanaka ordered a screen brought to the room. She sat Sethrak down in a chair and played the footage from Elysium 4. All of it. Every minute of the 9-hour bombardment. The cities burning, the forests dying, the oceans boiling. Governor Achebe's last message. Commander Park's final transmission as the Resolve was torn apart. The screams of millions of people who had done nothing wrong except live on a world that a warlord had decided to burn. Sethrak watched all 9 hours. He did not look away because the guards would not let him. When it was over, Tanaka leaned forward and spoke quietly. "You will not die today, warlord. You do not deserve the mercy of a quick end. You will stand trial for what you did, not because we want revenge, but because 11 million people deserve justice, and you will give it to them, whether you want to or not." Sethrak said nothing. For the first time in his life, the great warlord of the Valkyrie Dominion had no words at all. Outside the viewport, the wreckage of his empire drifted silently through the void, and the Terran fleet sat in perfect formation around his homeworld. Not firing, not threatening, just waiting. The message was clear. The war was over. And they had won, without becoming the monsters they had fought. 1 year after the war ended, they held the trial on Elysium. Not on a space station, not on Earth, not in the comfortable chambers of the Sovereignty Council. They held it on the surface of the world that Sethrak had burned, in a courtroom built from the rubble of what had once been the capital city. The ground was still black. The air still smelled of ash, even after 12 months of atmospheric recovery. Nothing grew there yet. The engineers said it would be decades before anything could. It was the perfect place for a reckoning. Warlord Sethrak and 40 of his commanders sat in the accused section, their wrists bound by energy restraints. Sethrak had changed in the year since his capture. The massive, armored warlord, who had once mocked humanity before the entire galaxy, now sat hunched and still. He had been held in a standard cell, not tortured, not starved, not mistreated in any way. The humans had fed him properly, given him medical care, and allowed him legal counsel. This, more than anything, seemed to disturb him. He understood cruelty. He did not understand this. The trial was broadcast to every world in the galaxy. Billions of beings from hundreds of species watched as the evidence was presented. Sensor recordings from the bombardment, communications logs showing that Sethrak had personally ordered the attack to continue for 9 hours, long after any military objective had been achieved. Testimony from the 120,000 survivors of Elysium, who described in plain, terrible detail what it was like to hide underground while their world burned above them. A young woman named Amara Achebe, the daughter of Governor Daniel Achebe, took the stand. She was 19 years old. She had been 14 on the night of the massacre. She had been pulled onto an evacuation shuttle by her mother, while her father stayed behind. She spoke clearly and without tears, because she had run out of tears a long time ago. "My father stayed because he would not leave his people," she said, looking directly at Sethrak. "He stayed because that is what good leaders do. You would not understand that." Sethrak did not meet her eyes. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts of genocide, crimes against sentient life, and the deliberate targeting of civilian populations. The sentence was life imprisonment. Sethrak would be held on a penal station built in orbit around Elysium 4, positioned so that the viewport of his cell faced the planet's surface at all times. He would spend the rest of his life looking down at the world he had destroyed. When the sentence was read, Sethrak finally spoke. His voice was rough and quiet, and it held none of the arrogance it once had. "Kill me," he said. "This is worse than death. That is why you are doing it." Admiral Tanaka, who was sitting in the observer section, said nothing. But those who were close enough to see her face said that for just a moment, something flickered across it. Not satisfaction, not triumph, but a deep and exhausted sadness. She had won the war, she had brought the enemy to justice, and she felt nothing but tired. After the trial, Chancellor Alara Vasquez addressed the galaxy one more time. She stood on the steps of the Elysium courthouse, with the ruined landscape stretching behind her to every horizon. She looked old. The past year had aged her in ways that time alone could not account for. But her voice was steady, and her words were chosen with the care of someone who understood that what she said next would shape the galaxy for generations. "The war is over," she said. "The Valkyrie Dominion has been disarmed. Their conquered territories have been liberated. Their military has been dissolved. Justice has been served, not through revenge, but through law." She paused and looked directly into the camera, speaking now to every sentient being watching across the stars. "But I did not come here to talk about the past. I came to talk about the future. Today, I announce the Elysium Doctrine. It is simple, and I want every species in this galaxy to hear it clearly." She took a breath. "From this day forward, any act of genocide, any deliberate massacre of a civilian population by any species against any species will be met with the full and unrestricted military response of the Terran Concord. We do not seek empire, we do not seek to rule, but we will not stand by while innocents are slaughtered. Not again, not ever." She let the words settle. "We extend the open hand once more. We offer friendship, trade, cooperation, and peace to any species willing to accept them. But behind that open hand, the fist will always be ready, and we will never again hesitate to use it." The Sovereignty Council, which had spent a year in various states of panic and guilt, ratified the Galactic Accords of Sentient Rights within 2 weeks. It was the first binding interstellar law that protected civilian populations during conflicts. It passed without a single vote against it. No one dared. In the months that followed, the galaxy slowly adjusted to the new reality. Some species sought alliances with humanity, recognizing that the Terran Concord was now the most powerful single entity in known space. Others began quiet, nervous arms races, building up their own defenses just in case. A few species, the older and wiser ones, like Ambassador Thyra's Valesi Federation, simply sent delegations to Earth to talk. Thyra came personally. She sat across from Dr. Lena Mwangi in a quiet room on Earth and asked the question that every species in the galaxy wanted answered. "How long were you holding back?" Mwangi smiled. It was a tired smile, with no joy in it. "Since the beginning. 60 years, Thyra said softly. "You had the power to dominate this galaxy for 60 years, and instead you built farms and schools and sent diplomats to be laughed at. Why?" "Because we wanted to be better than our history," Mwangi said. "Humans have a long and bloody past, Ambassador. We have done terrible things to each other. When we reached the stars, we made a choice. We would try to be the people we wished we had always been. Kind, patient, merciful. And now?" Mwangi was quiet for a moment. "Now we are still those people, but we have learned that mercy without strength is just an invitation to be destroyed. We will still be kind, we will still be patient, but we will never again be helpless." Thyra nodded slowly. Her bioluminescent patterns shifted through colors that Mwangi could not read. "I think," the old ambassador said, "that your species may be the most important thing to happen to this galaxy in a very long time. I hope we are all wise enough to deserve you." Admiral Kira Tanaka retired from active command 6 months after the war. She was offered every honor humanity could give: statues, medals, titles, a seat on the newly created Galactic Security Council. She accepted the council seat because she felt it was her duty, but she refused everything else. She kept one thing on her desk in her new office: a holographic image of the TCS Resolve, Commander Park's little frigate that had thrown itself between a fleet and a mountain full of civilians. People asked her about it sometimes. She never explained it. She did not need to. Everyone who saw it understood. Some debts could never be repaid. They could only be remembered. On the first anniversary of the massacre, Chancellor Vasquez traveled to Elysium 4. The surface was still mostly barren, but the atmospheric processors were working, and in a few sheltered valleys, the first tiny patches of green had begun to appear. New grass pushing through the ash, stubborn and alive. The Elysium Memorial had been built on the site of the old capital. It was a vast open field, and in that field stood 11 million small lights, one for each person who had died. They glowed softly in the dim light of Elysium's recovering atmosphere, stretching to the horizon in every direction, like a sea of quiet stars. Vasquez walked among them alone. She read the names. She touched the lights. She stayed for hours. General Ose found her as the sun was setting. A pale, hazy sunset filtered through an atmosphere still healing from fire. He walked beside her in silence for a while, and then he asked the question she had been asking herself for a year. Do you regret it? The years of peace, the open hand, all of it, even knowing what it cost? Vasquez stopped walking. She looked out across the field of lights, 11 million souls glowing in the growing dark. She was quiet for a long time. The wind moved through the memorial, and the lights flickered gently, and for a moment it almost looked like they were breathing. I do not regret that we tried to be kind, she said at last. I grieve that kindness was not enough. They stood together in the fading light, two old soldiers surrounded by the dead, and they said nothing more. There was nothing more to say. Far away, deep inside the hollowed-out moon of Callisto, the Aegis yards were still running. New ships were being built. New weapons were being designed, things the galaxy could not yet imagine and would hopefully never see. Thousands of engineers and scientists worked in silence, day and night, building the tools that humanity prayed it would never need again. Not because they wanted war. They did not. Every single person in those yards would have given anything to shut the doors and walk away forever. But they had learned the hardest lesson the universe had to teach, and they would not forget it. Peace was not the absence of strength. It was strength that chose not to destroy. And if that choice was ever taken from them again, if another Elysium ever burned, if another 11 million voices were ever silenced, then God help those who took it. Because humanity would remember. Humanity always remembered. And they were no longer merciful.